Well, and even if you're not building a satellite or thinking about what can we shoot into space, you can still become an archaeologist and also use space. And I'd like Oksana Burnayeva to come and talk about how she uses space for archaeology.
Thank you. Okay, good afternoon. So my name is Oksana Burnayeva and I'm an archaeologist, and I actually needed space in my research. So archaeology is the study of the human past using material remains, basically. But today archaeology is so much more than that. For example, digital archaeologists, they use digitization, analysis, and visualization of large data sets generated by field research and museum collections. And geoarchaeologists use methods from earth sciences and remote sensing techniques, such as LiDAR, magnetometry, ground-penetrating radar for the geological survey. Okay, yeah, we are witnessing how humanity is discovering space at an incredible speed. Now, we have the unique opportunity to observe our own planet from space using satellites for environmental monitoring, meteorology, cartography, and so much more. And archaeologists use remote sensing to monitor grave robberies, to identify ancient settlement areas, and so much more. In my book, Reconstruction of Physical Activities of Two Central European Migration Period Populations based on interstitial changes and aerospace imagery of regions, from 2020, I proposed the methods of reconstruction of physical activity of past human populations. The subjects of my study were two migration periods in 5th, 6th century AD Lombard Germanic Germanic people, populations from Gan and Shamorin, southwestern Slovakia, and their enthesopathies, those are muscle insertion sites on your bones, on human bones. Since the analysis of the material culture did not provide information about possible repetitive physical activities, as the graves were robbed, it was decided to utilize historical and 3D maps, optical satellite, and LiDAR imagery to analyze the regions inhabited by these two populations. Satellite and LiDAR imagery appear to be much useful compared with historical maps, as these maps are no older than several centuries, while the history of the macro relief extends to the geological history. Optical satellite imagery was analyzed in its different seasons. I also tried to use synthetic aperture radar data, but the swath suite of Sentinel-1 interferometric wide beam is too big for my studied areas. For the first time in scientific research, the synthesis of analysis of statistically prevailing enthesopathies and aerospace imagery of regions was used to obtain plausible hypotheses about physical activity of past populations. This approach allowed to reasonably correlate enthesopathies with manual reclamation activity for one population and rowing, net fishing for another. So, as you already noticed, remote sensing archaeology is directed from space to Earth. But space archaeology is the study of human-made items found in space and their preservation as cultural heritage of humanity. It includes launch complexes on Earth, and then we look up to orbital debris, satellites, and objects and structures on other celestial bodies, for example, the Moon and Mars. In the future, space tourism can affect archaeological artifacts. Therefore, the model was suggested for international cooperation based upon Antarctica. A manuscript by scientists at NASA and ESA raised the possibility of preserving Apollo landing sites for future astroarchaeologists. The International Space Station archaeological project is the first large-scale investigation of a space habitat from an archaeological perspective. The researchers use new methods to study the space station without being able to visit it directly. These methods include using more than 2 decades of photographs stored in Space Agency archives to document life on board the ISS, observing the processes used for handling cargo returned from the ISS, and developing experiments for the crew to perform on the archaeological behalf. In January 2022, the International Space Station Archaeological Project announced that it had initiated the first archaeological documentation in situ material culture in a space habitat, the Sampling Quadrangle Assemblages Research Experiment. NASA astronaut taped 1 meter squares on the walls throughout the space station. Instead of digging these squares to reveal new layers of soil representing different moments in the site's history, ISS crew will photograph them each day to identify how they were being used and how they change over time. We really need archaeology in space because without the past, there is no future. And archaeology is not only for Earthians anymore. Thank you.
Thank you, Oksana. So, you've seen a whole variety of space-linked research, right?